2 years ago, one raw material was in the middle of the biggest price mania since the dot-com bubble. Today, it's crashed by more than 80%. It's called lithium. It's in the phone in your pocket right now, and almost nobody outside a handful of trading floors noticed the crash happen. For over a decade, the story was the same. Electric cars are expensive because batteries are expensive, and batteries will stay expensive forever. That's what car makers told us. That's what most of us just assumed. It was mostly true. And then, very quietly, it stopped being true. In the next 12 minutes, how a boring industrial mineral turned into the wildest commodity mania in years, why almost none of the scientists who invented this battery ever made a dollar from it, why the crash happened almost entirely inside China, and why even now, with zero government subsidies left, you're still feeling the effects of it. Zimbabwe holds Africa's largest lithium reserves, and for years, trucks lined up at its borders hauling out raw, unprocessed ore, almost all of it headed straight to China. By late 2022, the Zimbabwean government had seen enough. Illegal mining and smuggling were bleeding the country's own revenue dry, so they banned the export of raw lithium ore outright. One local economist put it bluntly, the country was, in his words, enriching China at its own expense. By February 2026, Zimbabwe went further and suspended nearly all raw mineral exports entirely. And here's the twist. Zimbabwe still doesn't have the facilities to process the lithium itself. It's sitting on one of the most valuable rocks on Earth, and it still can't fully cash in on it. That imbalance, who digs it up versus who actually controls what happens to it next, is the entire story of this video. But before we get to how China ended up controlling that next step, we need 40 seconds on where this technology even came from, because almost nobody in the West made real money from inventing it either. For most of the 20th century, lithium was about as exciting as table salt, used in ceramic glazes, industrial grease, and this part is real, as one of the first drugs ever used to treat bipolar disorder back in the late 1940s. Then, in 1980 at Oxford, physicist John Goodenough built a lithium cobalt oxide cathode that could store far more energy than anything before it. He did not patent it for himself. Oxford handed the rights to a British government nuclear lab, which licensed it out cheaply. In 1991, Sony combined that cathode with a new anode from Japanese chemist Akira Yoshino and sold the world's first commercial lithium-ion battery. Goodenough Yoshino and a third scientist, Stanley Whittingham, finally got a Nobel Prize for it in 2019, 39 years after the discovery, and by their own accounts, with close to zero royalties between the three of them. Lithium batteries quietly powered laptops and phones for the next 2 decades, and lithium itself stayed cheap. Then Tesla went mainstream. Every major automaker announced an electric vehicle lineup, and demand for battery-grade lithium exploded. Between 2020 and late 2022, the price in China rocketed from around 52,000 yuan a ton to more than 560,000 yuan a ton, over a 10-time spike in about 2 years. Junior mining companies from Australia to Mali started calling it white gold. People who'd never heard the word spodumene were trading it like a meme stock. Here is what almost nobody outside the industry realizes. China does not actually have most of the world's lithium. It holds less than 10% of known reserves. Australia, Chile, and Argentina have far more rock and brine in the ground, and that is exactly what you just saw play out in Zimbabwe. What China built instead was the refining. Turning raw ore or brine into ultra-pure battery-grade lithium chemical is a messy, toxic, capital-intensive chemistry process, and frankly, not something most Western countries were eager to host in their own backyard. China spent 2 decades building that capacity anyway, while almost nobody else bothered to compete for it. Depending on the analyst, China now processes somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the entire world's lithium supply. Australia alone ships something like 96% of the raw lithium it mines straight to China, because there is barely anywhere else on Earth that can refine it at this scale. On top of that, one Chinese company, CATL, builds more electric vehicle batteries than any other manufacturer on the planet, with BYD close behind. So when Chinese refiners built enough processing capacity for the demand boom automakers had promised, that capacity kept coming online long after the original 2022 mania had already started cooling off. By early 2026, the imbalance got so extreme that China itself had to start shutting its own mines down. In the lithium hub of Jiangxi province, regulators canceled more than 24 mining permits in a matter of months as part of what officials called an anti-involution campaign. Official language for too many companies are drilling too much rock at a loss, and it has to stop. One of CATL's own lithium mines, Jiangxi, was ordered to suspend operations entirely. The world's single largest battery maker had to shut down its own mine, not because it ran out of lithium, but because there was suddenly, catastrophically, too much of it. The number that matters? Lithium carbonate went from a peak of roughly 566,000 yuan a ton in November 2022 to bottoming out around $8,200 a ton by mid-2025, more than an 80% collapse from peak to trough. Several of the same Australian mining companies that rushed to open new pits during the 2022 mania had to cut production or shut mines down entirely by 2024, unable to sell rock for more than it cost them to dig it up. The mania that made white gold famous ended the way most manias do, not with a villain who got caught, but with too many people believing the good times were permanent and building enough supply to prove themselves wrong. Here's where this stops being an abstract commodity story if you live in the United States or Europe. In September 2025, the United States federal government eliminated the $7,500 tax credit that used to make new electric vehicles artificially cheaper. If battery economics worked the way people assumed, electric vehicle prices should have jumped right back up the moment the discount disappeared. Instead, in 2026, Hyundai cut the price of its Ioniq 5 by close to $10,000, bringing the base model down to around $35,000, with zero subsidy behind that number. That's not the full explanation on its own. Automakers set prices for plenty of reasons. But a raw material that's 80% cheaper than it was 3 years ago is a real part of how that kind of cut becomes possible without automakers losing money on every car. Europe took the opposite approach. Worried that ultra-cheap Chinese electric vehicles would wipe out its own car industry, the European Union added extra tariffs of up to 35% on top of its existing 10% import duty, pushing total duties past 45% for some Chinese brands, which tells you something on its own. European regulators weren't reacting to a shortage. They were reacting to prices getting too low, too fast, for their own manufacturers to survive. And the same crash making cars cheaper is doing something bigger, quietly. The identical battery chemistry that goes into an electric vehicle also goes into the giant packs power grids use to store solar and wind energy overnight. When the raw material got this cheap, grid-scale storage got cheaper right along with it too. A mineral that used to be a treatment for bipolar disorder and an additive in industrial grease is now quietly helping rewire how entire countries keep the lights on after dark. Two scientists who helped invent this technology never made real money from it. A country that mined almost none of the raw material ended up controlling the entire supply chain anyway, and the country that actually holds the reserves, Zimbabwe, still can't fully cash in on the thing sitting under its own ground. That's not a conspiracy. That's just what happens when a 100-year-old myth about expensive batteries runs straight into an oversupplied factory floor. And whoever controls the middle of the supply chain ends up controlling the whole thing.